This is Grandmaster Boris Alterman and you're watching Gambit Guide. Hello and welcome everybody. We continue today our course on Gambit Guide, which is Scandinavian Gambit. And after e4, d5, e takes d5, this opening line becomes quite popular recently because black immediately trying to get rid of white center pawn and to get I would say, free development of all his pieces, especially the light square bishop, which is just having a trouble in such opening like a French defense. So, but in case of queen takes d5, which is quite normal in the Scandinavian defense, black's queen just gets into the game too early, which white can use quite easily with the move knight c3, so attacking the black's most powerful piece, and of course moving once again the black's queen from the center. After queen a5 and d4, of course we are getting the normal position of the Scandinavian defense. Indeed, after e takes d5, black has another alternative, so knight f6. So black would like to capture d5 pawn, not with the queen but with the knight later on. Definitely white could just simply allow black doing that after simple move like d4. Still after knight takes d5, the position is quite complicated and black is ready to fan-chatter his bishop to g7 after g6. And then after castling, finally to challenge white center by e5 or c5 ideas, of course. Indeed, after knight f6, white has temporary material advantage and could support this d5 pawn, but by the simple move c2, c4. After which black is almost forced to offer white the gambit variation, so to offer the pawn sacrifice. So this position after c4, it was quite even today we can find it even in the top games. However, after c6, white usually is not accepting the pawn sacrifice and trying to play d2 and d4, getting into the pawn of attack of the Caracan defense, which we can reach with the different moves order: e4, c6, d4, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, and c4 when knight f6 just reach the similar position we just looked on. What would happen in case white decides to accept the sacrifice after d takes c6? In that case, black is getting just quite serious development advantage, and the position quite reminds us the situation which we studied in the Scotch Gambit or Danish Gambit, or even in the Evans Gambit, when thanks to better development and control over the center squares, black quite easy could bring all his pieces to the center after e7, e5, take more control over the most important part of the chessboard, these four squares, and by developing the bishop on c5 and then other bishop to f5 or g4, just to get a quite serious compensation for the small material deficit. For the first time, this position happened in the game between Mortal James and Blackburn Geoff Henry in London tournament 1887. After knight f3, e5, d3, and bishop f5, so we already could see that it is not so simple for white to play this position. Black is intending the d3 pawn, in mind queen d7 maybe, with the idea to increase attack against the d3 pawn after long castling. So black's dark square bishop is quite easily could find quite good square on c5 or even on b4, and the full control over the strong outpost on d4 definitely gives black just very strong compensation for a pawn. After knight c3, bishop b4, and bishop g5, h6, bishop takes f6 and queen takes f6, black got even two bishops advantage, and still the long castling is on the air, after which d3 pawn would be quite significant problem for white. Queen c2. But now, when white's queen went to c2, that knight d4 idea becomes another difficult problem for white. So, Joseph Henry Blackburn just completed his development and played short castling, so he decided that the rook could come to e8 quite fast, and the other rook, of course, the most natural square, is on d8. Long castling. Otherwise, for white, it's quite difficult to stop knight d4 threat. Bishop takes c3. Queen takes c3, and black opens up the position of white's queen side. b5, with idea to get the control over the c file, where also queen and also king are situated. So it's quite dangerous for white to play c takes b5, because after rook a to c8, it's quite difficult to avoid the material losses. Let's say in case of b takes c6 and rook takes c6, the queen is gone. Indeed, after save move b3, black got very strong attack, b4. So there is no way to avoid opening the a file. Queen b2 and a5. So black is intending now a4. Knight e2. a4, knight a4, and this is another positional mistake, because after trade of this strong knight, bishop takes e4 and d takes e4, all dark squares and in the black hand. A takes b3, a takes b3, queen f4 check. So the knight is coming soon on d4, rook d2, and instead of capturing the pawn on e4, black simply continued his pieces development, rook f to d8. So suddenly white has no any defense. For instance, after bishop e2, we just simply trade on d2, and after queen takes d2 and rook a1 check, or rook or queen. So white is just, king is overloaded, and just white cannot escape from the huge material losses. So you can realize that even move like g3 doesn't help so much, since once again black is having this powerful move. Check, 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 and with the next move, rook is coming to the second rank, and the white's king is going to be mated. So we can see that already first game played with the Scandinavian Gambit showed us a great potential, and quite naturally, I would say, black got very strong compensation for the pawn, thanks to just great development. And when white made one mistake, not following the opening principles, not developing his pieces, but played once again with the same pieces, black quite easily realized his great positional advantage. Just 20 years later, Emanuel Lasker played in Berlin simultaneous exhibition, and after e4 d5, e takes d5, knight f6, c4, I guess was quite surprised when his opening answered c6. So even the second world champion was not so successful in meeting this strong opening line. After knight takes c6, look once again the position of the pawn on c4. This pawn doesn't help white's development at all, and only creates weak square on d4 for black pieces. And this key point we also could see in the next game. So first of all, Lasker decided simply continue developing on his pieces after knight c3, but e5, d3, bishop c5, bishop e3, trying to exchange the pieces, and knight d4. So black is still playing for this d4 outpost. It's clear that white just simply cannot capture on d4. After e takes d4 and then bishop comes with a check to b4, white's king is under very unpleasant threats. After knight f3 and knight g4, black is intending to capture the bishop on e3. Bishop takes d4. Only now e takes d4 and knight e4. Bishop b4 check, knight fd2, and definitely black is not going to attack immediately the knight after f5, since the bishop on b4 is hanging, and with a quite simple combinations, quite simple double attack, which we already studied in our lectures. Queen a4 check, white simply gaining the already now decisive material advantage. The bishop on b4 just gone. So instead we continue and follow the opening principles. Make castling, short castling. Bishop e2, definitely white has to develop his pieces, and now suddenly came knight e3 move. Using the tactical opportunity, so black is going to open position for his two powerful bishops, f takes e3, d takes e3, so knight on d2 is pinned. It's necessary to castle, but now black gains back the material after e takes d2, knight takes d2, and queen d4, and after king h1 and queen takes b2. Black is having just two bishops in the open position. White's king is not so safe on h1, and after black just regroup all his pieces, white position will become very, very dangerous. So clear that after the opening, the last year's opening just got very promising position. Knight e4. White is trying to keep his pieces in the center. Indeed, this knight on e4 just cannot stand on e4 for a while, since black always could attack it after f7 and f5. But first of all, of course, black has to avoid rook a b1 threat, which attacks the b4 and b2 queen at the same time. Queen d4, rook b1, a5. So black is already intending f7, f5, and white hardly even could stop it. Probably Lasker had to forget now about active moves and to play something very safe like bishop f3. Still after bishop f3 and maybe h6, and later on black just simply continued developing bishop to e6, and then rook comes to d8. The problem of white weak pawns in the center could be quite serious. And don't forget that black at the right moment could always push f7, f5. Indeed, Lasker, as usual happened in the simultaneous exhibition, just decided to attack the queen and played queen f4, rook f4, intending just to make discovery check after knight f6. Strangely enough, this move is a serious tactical blunder, because after the black's f5 answer, the knight cannot go to f6 anymore. So black's queen is just simply captured. And at the same time, white's knight cannot move to any other places because the rook on f4 is just on the air. So after queen b3, white is trying his last chances. So the first trap. Now if f takes e4, suddenly instead of winning, black just getting into the trouble. c4, c5, just locking the only defender of the rook on f8, and black is just losing his extra piece, since only move for now to avoid the checkmate after rook takes f8 is bishop to e6. King h8, as I explained, the f8 rook now was not protected anymore. So the first trap, Lasker's opponent quite successfully avoided and played bishop to e6. Now there's nothing could save already. The knight on e4, and Lasker trying his last knight g5 move. After queen takes f4 and knight takes e6. So black now under the double threat. The queen on f4 and rook on f8 is under threat, and it looks like now white is gaining back the material and could successfully defend his position. Queen e5. Knight takes f8 and queen takes e2. The knight is trapped now. Only escape is a d7 square. So Lasker of course played knight d7, but black continued his attack against white's king. So unfortunately white pieces lost the harmony, and white's king is under decisive mate attack, which once again Lasker's opponent just quite brilliantly used. Bishop e1. So now white's discoordinated pieces cannot save his king. Black is intending queen f1 with a checkmate. c5 check. King h8. h3 only chance. Queen f1 check. King h2 and f4. White is just completely hopeless against the bishop g3 check, and this will be mate, of course. So after rook takes e1 and queen takes e1, once again white cannot even move with his queen and to capture the pawn on b7, because after queen g3 check, king g1 and rook e8, there is no any way to stop rook e1 with a decisive mating threats over the back rank. So Lasker played in this position d4, and once again his opponent just choose the most precise continuation. When you have material advantage, it's a good idea always just to exchange pieces. And queen g3 was played. Queen take g3, f take g3, king take g3, and after seeing the last move of his opponent, rook a to d8, so black is just coming with a decisive attack against white's d4 pawn, since white's knight from d7 has to escape to e5, so black is just gaining pawn on d4, and all white weak pawns are gone very soon. So Lasker decided at this position already to call it a day and just resigned. So it was once again one of the first, I would say, experiences of play the Scandinavian Gambit, and once again it was very, very successful. In this game, the Lasker's opponent, Benish, showed just quite interesting way of developing the initiative in the Scandinavian Gambit. When I looked at other examples of what kind of difficulties white has to fight against the black's development advantage, which we can reach in the Scandinavian Gambit, I would like just to show you a few quite famous traps which could happen in such a position. So one game played in 2009 between Monir and Pascal in the Spring Festival. After e4, d5, e takes d5, and knight f6, c4, c6, d takes c6, and knight takes c6. White played knight f3, and after e5, knight c3. So strangely enough, this quite obvious move when white is continued developing his pieces becomes a quite serious error, which black could easily punish after e4 move. So black is winning more territory, takes more control over the d4 and d3 square. And I believe that white was just, when looked at this position, was hoping that after queen e2, it's not so easy for black to protect this pawn on e4. Indeed, after queen e7, white's knight has no square to escape. In the game, after knight g1 and bishop g4, fantastic move, which looks very simple, but in our case it's just decisive. Look at the position. White cannot move the queen. After queen e3 and knight b4, there is nothing could prevent black's knight from achieving the c2 square with a decisive triple attack. It's already it's such a powerful fork. So if queen is going to somewhere to f4, knight c2 is a checkmate. Rook b1, knight c2, checkmate. f3, knight c2, winning a queen for nothing. So it means that white is having only move in this position is f3 move. But still after knight comes to d4 at that time, attacking the queen on e2, there is no way to escape. Queen e3 once again would be met by knight c2, check. And queen f2 will be met by e takes f3 with a check. After king d1 and f takes g2, white is just losing all his pieces. Such a great domination of black forces in the center. And definitely the last knight e2 or bishop e2 is going to lose anyway after any. Just simply I could capture with my pawn on e2, or I can first play knight c2. It doesn't change anything. White is losing at least one piece. So just 8 move and white resigned. Let's look at one more game. Played between Samuel Mariana and Susan Lalic in the United Kingdom National League in 2007. So in that game after e4 and d5. So by the way, Susan Lalic is a grandmaster. She plays for England national team in the Olympiad many times. After e4, e takes d5 and knight f6, c4. So she just simply sacrificed the pawn after c6, like we studied already. D takes c6, knight takes c6. And suddenly your opponent played b3. e5, bishop b2. And in that case, of course, black is just continue pressing on white's position after bishop c5. So development of the bishop on c5 is very important because black always having a lot of opportunity against white's weakest spot in the opening is the f2 pawn. After knight c3, black cannot attack white's position immediately after knight g4 because this could be met by knight e4 move, and at the same time black just cannot protect the bishop on c5 and to continue to attack the pawn on f2. Bishop g4 is very interesting. White cannot move knight f3 because after e4 we have a lot of troubles. The knight on f3 is pinned. White cannot move bishop e2 because in that case we can use quite typical combination which already we studied many times in the Philidor defense, in the Danish Gambit, in the Evans Gambit, and this combination is based on the black's better control over the center squares. And the move would be queen d4 when white cannot avoid the immediate checkmate threat on f2. So the bishop on g4 just preventing white's knight to cover f2 square from h3. So after knight h3 move, we just simply remove this only defender, bishop takes h3, and the game is finished immediately. So after bishop g4, white also cannot move the queen after, let's say, move like queen c2 once again. So black just gaining more and more tempi after knight d4. So f3 is the only chance, but in that case after bishop f5, black is intending to bring the knight to b4 and then or to d3 onto c2. So such a great control over the center squares moved white to attack the black's bishop after g4. So trying maybe to move the light square bishop later on to g2, maybe this knight to h3, but of course There's not so great strategy to move only your pawns in the opening. So black's, I would say, positional advantage, the greatest development of all his pieces, just allowing us to finish the game with a quite simple combination, which Susan Polgar, of course, easy found. So she just played knight take g4, which forced her opponent to resign immediately. Since this simple sacrifice allowed black's queen to join the attack with a decisive effect. After f take g4 and queen h4 check, king e2, it's the only way to stop the check, and then queen f2, the checkmate. So just in opening, white cannot complete his simple task of development the pieces because black's initiative just developed so fast. So once again we can see how easy black could punish white's undeveloped position. It's just no way for white to waste so much time with the development of the bishop on b2 when all his king side is just sleeping. Okay, let's go for the next example. This game played in 1987 in Dortmund Open Tournament between Rolf Sieberg and Bogdan Stanescu. After e4 d5, e takes d5, and knight f6, c4, c6, d takes c6, and knight takes c6. So this time white choose to develop the king side, knight f3, e5, d3, and now very interesting next move. So usually the black is developing here the bishop on c5 or bishop to f5. Indeed, we have opportunity to break the center after e5, e4 move. The point is that after d takes e4, queen takes d1, king takes d1, black not only opened up the position, but also white's king lost the castling right. And after knight takes e4, black pieces are very fast reaching the great position. So the bishop could be developed to c5, to g4, long castling, white's king still stuck in the center. So we just almost cannot feel any material advantage from white side when all black pieces are extremely active. So here is a full domination. By the way, the e4 move also was used by the grandmaster Michael Adams in his game against Murray Chandler, which we will study later on. So in that game, after e4, queen e2, bishop b4 check, bishop d2, and short castling. So black completed his development very fast. D takes e4, and here simple combination, knight takes e4. Definitely white cannot touch the knight on e4 because after rook e8 we can see that both king and the queen on the same file, so and white is going to lose his strongest piece. Indeed, after bishop takes b4, black suddenly answered rook e8, which I guess came as a huge surprise for white. So look at that. Having the extra piece, white just cannot save his queen. After queen c2 and knight takes b4, game just finished immediately, but white just simply resigned because there is no way to stop on knight c3 with a decisive attack against white's uncastled king, or knight g3 just winning the rook on h1. Indeed, even after the strongest move like bishop a3, and black could even now continue simply developing all his pieces after bishop g4, white is completely lost. But of course we also could win the queen by move like knight f6. So strangely enough, just after 10 moves after rook e8, white already could resign. So once again we can see very powerful weapon, Scandinavian Gambit. So in the next lecture I would like to carry on with more, I would say, interesting games which short games, of course, also. I would say miniatures, when black just showed the great potential of the Scandinavian attack, Scandinavian Gambit. But also I would like just to show you some games played by strong opening on the top level tournaments when the Scandinavian Gambit was used very successfully. It's Grandmaster Boris Alter. On my ICC handle is Oriela. For more videos on Gambit Guide, you can find on chess.fm.